Some of you have probably seen parts 1, 2, and 3 of this series where we go over NBA records that you might not have known existed. Well, this is part 4, and today I wanted to switch things up a little bit and look at some team records instead of all individual ones. Starting off with the largest comeback in NBA history. For this record, we have to turn the clock back to November 27th, 1996, where the Utah Jazz took on the Denver Nuggets. Despite having their top-tier duo of John Stockton and Karl Malone, the Jazz still somehow found themselves down by a staggering 36 points with only 20 seconds until halftime. While many in their spot would be ready to throw in the towel, that was not the case for the Jazz. They were able to cut the lead down to 34 heading into halftime and faced an uphill battle in the second half, entering the locker room down 70-36. However, Utah came out of the gates scorching hot in the second half and continued to chip away at Denver's commanding lead, only allowing 15 points in the third quarter. The Nuggets still held a 13-point lead heading into the fourth, but Utah continued their dominance on both ends of the floor and ended up taking this game by a final score of 107-103. Shockingly, they were able to make this historic comeback with John Stockton only making 2 shots from the field. He finished a miserable 2 of 12. Karl Malone and Jeff Hornacek stepped up in a big way offensively, scoring 31 and 29 points respectively. While the Jazz hold this record for the largest comeback in league history, this next record is arguably even more impressive. This record takes us all the way back to November 25th, 1977, where the Bucks pulled off the largest fourth quarter comeback of all time against the Atlanta Hawks. Heading into the fourth quarter, the Bucks found themselves facing a 28-point deficit. Up to that point in the game, the most points they were able to muster in a single quarter had been 33, meaning not only did their offense have to be on the top of their game, having the best quarter of that night, but their defense also almost had to be perfect for Milwaukee to have a chance. However, we would not be talking about this game right now if that's not exactly what happened. The Bucks outscored the Hawks 41-11 in the fourth quarter to win that game 117-115. The bench came through in a huge way, with Junior Bridgman leading the team with 24 points and Alex English adding on 17. Now I want to jump to a game that even the Jazz and the Bucks could not have had any prayer of making a comeback in. This record right here just proves how quickly things can change in the NBA. On December 2nd, 2021, the Memphis Grizzlies set the record for the largest margin of victory in their 73-point beatdown of the Oklahoma City Thunder. Just 2.5 years later, the Thunder are over here fighting for one of the top seeds in the Western Conference, while Memphis could very well end up with a high lottery pick. However, in their 2021 matchup, this was one to remember for the Grizzlies. Early on, it was beginning to look like things could get ugly very quickly, with Memphis taking a commanding 31-16 lead in just the first quarter. Things got even worse for Oklahoma City, though, heading into halftime as they faced a 72-36 deficit. Unlike the Utah Jazz game that we previously discussed, the Thunder did not put up much of a fight in the third quarter, letting the lead continue to grow to 113-62. They were far from having a fourth quarter miracle like the Milwaukee Bucks in 1977, letting the Grizzlies continue to stomp on them. Once the onslaught was finally over and the final buzzer had sounded, Memphis held a 152-79 lead, giving them an NBA record-setting 73-point win. While the Thunder were without Shai Gilgeous-Alexander that night, the Grizzlies were able to pull off this crazy win without their star point guard Ja Morant. Now, if you're a fan of scoring, this next record is probably going to be your favorite that I'll talk about. On December 13th, 1983, the Detroit Pistons and the Denver Nuggets participated in the greatest shootout in NBA history. Not only did the Pistons set the record for most points in a game, including overtime, the two teams also combined for the most total points in an NBA game. In the first quarter, both teams came out of the gates blazing hot on offense, combining for 72 points, the Pistons holding a narrow 38-34 lead. The scoring did not slow down a single bit, though, in the second quarter, with another 76 points being scored and the game being all knotted up at 74 heading into the half. Even with the break, the offenses on both sides of the basketball kept their foot on the gas, collectively putting up 142 points in the second half. At the end of regulation, both teams were still tied 145-145. This game stayed neck and neck and even went into triple overtime. It was finally decided with the Pistons only winning by just 2 points. The final score came out to be 186 to 184, with Detroit setting the record for most points scored in an overtime game, and the teams combining for a record-setting 370 points. Now I want to flip things to the opposite end of the spectrum in an extremely rough offensive showing from one team. In the years following Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen's elite run with the Chicago Bulls that resulted in 6 rings, the team quickly became one of the worst in the league. On April 10th, 1999, the Bulls set the record for the fewest points in a regulation game post-shot clock era. They faced off against a talented Miami Heat team. However, there was no excuse for them to finish that game with an embarrassing 49 total points as a team. There are many players throughout the history of the league that have scored more than that by themselves in one game. They had an awful first quarter, only mustering 8 points to Miami's 23. Heading into halftime, the Bulls were down 55 to 23. Things did not get better for the once unstoppable Bulls in the second half, as they were only able to score a collective 26 points in the next 2 quarters. When it was all said and done, the Bulls were sent home with their tails between their legs, losing by a final score of 82 to 49, putting on one of the worst the worst offensive performance in NBA history. Chicago finished that game shooting 23.4% from the field, didn't make a single three-pointer, and shot 54.2% from the free throw line. Now, I don't know about you, but I want to get the bad taste of that game out of my mouth, and I want to take a look at a team whose entire game plan was to outpace and outscore their opponent. On November 10th, 1990, the Phoenix Suns took on the Denver Nuggets in what was an electric first half of basketball. Despite the Nuggets putting up a very respectable 67 points in the first half, Phoenix had a jaw-dropping half of their own, setting the record for the most points ever scored in a half with 107. Despite Denver's shootout against the Pistons coming nearly 7 years prior, they still kept a very similar game plan. They didn't put too much effort into defense and focused all of their energy on beating their opponent down the court on offense and scoring at a pace that could not be matched. However, they did meet their match in the Suns, who were more than ready to take advantage of this scheme. In just the first quarter, the Suns took a commanding 50-37 lead, and they did not take their foot off the gas pedal in the following period either. In the second, Phoenix managed to somehow beat their first quarter total, putting up 57 points to the Nuggets' 30. Heading into halftime, Phoenix held a 107-67 lead, and while they were unable to keep up that first half pace, the Suns still took this game in commanding fashion, winning by a final score of 173-143. Even with the Suns' historic scoring pace in the first half of that matchup, one team from the early 70s also had a fourth quarter to remember. Before they became the Los Angeles Clippers, the team was known as the Buffalo Braves. On October 20th, 1972, they took on the Boston Celtics in what was set to be a tough matchup for Buffalo. Heading into the fourth quarter, they struggled to keep up with Boston's elite roster featuring future Hall of Famers like Don Nelson, Paul Westphal, Dave Cowens, JoJo White, and John Havlicek. Facing a 103-60 deficit, the Braves needed nothing short of a miracle to make this comeback. While they were ultimately unable to make the comeback and lost the game by a final score of 126-118, they were still able to make history. Buffalo put up a mind-blowing 58 points in the fourth quarter, and despite falling short of a win, this was still the highest scoring quarter from any team in NBA history. Now, even with their extreme success in this current 23-24 season, there have been some low points for the Oklahoma City Thunder this year. One so bad that it even put them in the history books for all the wrong reasons. Coming into the matchup on December 2nd, 2023 between the Thunder and the Mavericks, fans were clamoring to see the offensive battle between Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Luka Doncic. This game ended up being a shootout with both teams scoring in the 120s, but in order to get there, the Mavericks had to put up the most unanswered points in NBA history. This run began with around 11 minutes left in the game when the Thunder stretched their lead to 111-87. However, this was the final points that they would score until around 4 minutes left in the game. During this 7-minute span, the Mavericks were able to score a jaw-dropping 30 unanswered points to take a 117 to 111 lead. But once things were all said and done, it didn't stop the Thunder, and they reclaimed the lead back and took the game by a final score of 126 to 120. While Dallas left with a loss, their historic run may remain in the record books for many years to come. While the bench for the Mavericks that night were unable to help them get a win in that game, only scoring 23 points, this next team's bench unit made history for all the right reasons. On April 9, 2023, in a matchup between the Heat and the Magic, Miami proved that they were one of the deepest teams in the NBA. In this game, they set the record for most points scored by a bench unit with 111 points. This came in the final game of the regular season without Jimmy Butler, and the Heat had 10 reserve players for this game. Miami had 5 bench players score in double digits that day, with Udonis Haslem scoring 24, Duncan Robinson putting up 20, Victor Oladipo finishing that night with 19, Jamal Cain picking up 18, and Omer Yurtseven contributing 14. To make this even more shocking, while the bench was able to score 111, the starting unit could only muster up a collective 12 points. With the bench unit for Miami picking up the slack in historic fashion in this one, they were still able to get this win by 13 points, 123 to 110. This elite depth from the Heat turned out to be their biggest asset heading into the postseason. The constant big performances from all their role players played a crucial role in them becoming the second 8 seed in league history to make the NBA Finals. Up next, we have a bizarre record that is likely to never be replicated again. On February 13th, 2019, the Portland Trail Blazers took on a loaded Golden State Warriors team that featured Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, and Draymond Green. Despite all that talent, Golden State still let their emotions get the best of them, and it led to the Trail Blazers making history. With around 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter, Portland held a 110 to 103 lead. Zach Collins drove to the basket and was fouled hard by Draymond. After reviewing the play, it was deemed a technical foul, which made Steve Kerr lose his mind. He slammed his clipboard down to the ground while screaming at the refs, and he was ultimately given a tech as well and ejected from the game. This set up the Trailblazers with a chance to take 4 foul shots, and they sank all of them. After inbounding the ball, Green picked up yet another foul, this time on Jake Layman. However, this foul came while Layman was shooting a three-pointer, which he made, giving Portland the record for most points scored in a single possession after he drained the next free throw with 8 points. This helped them steal a win over one of the most talented rosters ever assembled, taking the game by a final score of 129 to 107. And while the Warriors made fools of themselves throughout that brutal possession, this next team had a nightmare of a 9-minute stretch that they wished they could forget about. On February 13, 2017, the Oklahoma City Thunder went on one of the worst shooting stretches in NBA history in their game against the Washington Wizards, missing 24 straight field goals. This run began with around 3.5 minutes left in the second quarter when Steven Adams was blocked on a layup by Marcin Gortat. At the time, the score was 61 to 52 in favor of the Wizards. However, by the time the Thunder were able to finally make another field goal, the Wizards had stretched their lead to 91 to 57. It took the Thunder 9 minutes to make one more field goal. This put on full display one of the most glaring flaws that the Thunder had that season, their lack of outside shooting talent. While Russell Westbrook did not have it going on around the basket, or opposing teams just forced him to take outside shots, Oklahoma City's offense came to a screeching halt. To the credit of the Thunder, though, they were still able to put up some points during that stretch from the free throw line, with Westbrook making 2 and Adams making 3. While the Thunder went on an awful 9-minute stretch in that game, one team struggled to hit 3-pointers throughout the entirety of a game. On January 16, 2019, the Houston Rockets took on the Brooklyn Nets, and Houston went on to set the record for most missed 3-point field goals in a game. During James Harden's time with the team, and especially towards the tail end of his stint in Houston, they lived and died by his ability to get buckets on offense. He was the definition of a player who had the green light at any time, and in this game alone, he took 34 shot attempts, 19 of them being 3-point attempts. In this game, the 3-ball was just not falling for him, and he shot 26.3% from beyond the arc. By the time the final whistle sounded, the Rockets had missed an astounding 47 of their 73-point attempts, setting an NBA record. Despite their atrocious night from 3, the Rockets still only lost by a final score of 145 to 142, just one more three-pointer short of sending this game into overtime. Now I want to take a look at the opposite end of the spectrum with a team that as a unit went on an offensive tear. They were shooting lights out from the field. On April 16, 1983, in the final game of the 1982-83 season, the Spurs took on the Mavericks in a game in which San Antonio set the record for highest field goal percentage by one team in a game. Almost everybody on the Spurs roster was lights out in this game, with the only players who shot under 50% from the field only taking a combined 2 shot attempts. Gene Banks finished this game with 21 points and did not miss a single field goal, and the same goes for Artis Gilmore, who dropped 24 points without missing. Along with this, the team's other 20-plus point scorers, Mike Mitchell and George Gervin, shot at least 50% or better from the field. When it was all said and done, the Spurs shot 53 for 75 from the field for a field goal percentage of 70.7%. With the team shooting this well as a unit, it was almost impossible for them to lose this game, even with the Mavericks playing their best basketball. San Antonio took this game by a final score of 132 to 120. And after talking about a team that just could not miss, it only seems right to cover a game in which a team could not buy a basket for all 4 quarters. On February 7, 1948, the Philadelphia Warriors took on the St. Louis Bombers and put on one of the worst shooting exhibitions that the game has ever seen. While they were still able to score more points than the 1999 Chicago Bulls team, the Warriors did set the record for lowest field goal percentage in a game at 16.4%. In this contest, they did not have a single player shoot over 27.3% from the field out of the 9 that saw the floor. Even with this horrendous showing, somehow the Warriors only lost by a final score of 67 to 54. Now, as always, if you guys enjoy this video and want to see a part 5 to this series, let me know in the comment section down below and hit that subscribe button.